Namaste, and welcome to yoga today. And we're carrying on in our studying of Eckhart Tolle's Stillness Speaks. And we talked last week about living in the now. And this week, next week, we're going to be carrying on looking at that and how important it is. And he says, keep an eye out for where we consciously are making a choice to have conflict between what's happening in the outside world, the circumstances we find ourselves in, and what's happening internally. And we all have these kinds of experiences where things are difficult outside. It could be something at work. And so you're at work and it might be a difficult situation. You're dealing with a difficult customer or client or something, or colleague, and the externals are difficult to contend with. But we're not really dealing with that. We're dealing with our internal dialogue about that. And there's a built-in conflict there. So here you are, maybe you're trying to find a way to resolve it, and you might be being polite to the person, but that might not be your internal dialogue that's going on at the time. And so that recognition that we live our life so often in conflict with the reality of what is at any given moment. So it's worth having a look and seeing what is going on with our own thoughts and feelings. Because we have the situation that we have to deal with externally, but we also have to deal with what's going on internally for us. So can you glimpse how painful it is when we stand in opposition to the situation we find ourselves in? We're talking about living in the now. Well, if you're striving to live in the now and your mind and emotions are not, shall we say, being cooperative, being pleasant, being, supportive of what's happening, they can act against us. So then we have to deal not only with the circumstances outside, but we also have to learn to accept and surrender to what's happening within us. And that can be equally, if not more difficult than accepting what's happening in our outside circumstances. And so if we were able to speak and to say what's really happening for us, even if it's something as simple, it happens all the time. My granddaughter's just gone off she's looking for a job. So she's gone to some, kind of an open day thing at a company to go and look and see what they do, and if there was a place for her in that company. So she's gone for this to go spend this day, and she went to get the train in and she missed the train. So my day, I had things I was going to do, but then she calls me and she's like, Nan, I've missed my train, and if you can't take me, I'm going to be stuck and I'm not going to make it. And so in that moment, what's the difference between the circumstances outside? So the circumstances outside are, she missed her train. That's it. No drama. That's just the reality of what's happened. She missed her train. But what's happening for her in that moment? What's happening for me? And in a way, one of the things that Eckhart Tolle says, when you verbalize your inner reality, how often would you have to say, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be where I am. I don't want to be in this situation. So my granddaughter doesn't want to be in this situation of missing the train and being late and maybe not getting to this job interview. I don't want to be in the situation where I've got to get in the car and go take it to the job interview, which I have just enough time to do if I leave right away, take her and get back to be back for yoga. But no leeway. So I chose to go and pick her up and take her. And when we got in the car, she was like, oh, Nan, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And, I've really messed up. All of that is against the moment. It's against life. She has a choice. She can be angry with herself for missing the train, or she can be grateful that I was there and able to come and get her, and that she's going to get to be there. And if you can be in the moment, you can get an insight into all of that. And you get to see what you could have done differently. Not because you're thinking it through, but because in that peace and stillness of the now, what happened is really clear. So it's really worth thinking about how often you have to say, I have to say, I don't want to be where I am right now. And to recognize that this is a really useless and dysfunctional attitude, and it makes you unhappy and it makes others unhappy as well. So what a wonderful thing to do, to recognize that when we're in that position where we don't want to be somewhere, we don't want to be doing something, that we're against life. We're fighting against it. It says, Eckhart Tolle says, what use is mentally labeling every experience, having a reactive like it or dislike it relationship with life? Oh, I'm happy about this, I'm not happy about that. Instead of the reality that everything happens for a reason. Everything in the universe brought you to this moment in time, to live it, to be present in this very moment. And us having that, well, I don't want to be here. I don't like this moment. I'm not going to be here now because I don't like it. I'm going to wait for a nicer moment. But the truth of it is if you can't be present for the bad or the difficult, you can't be present for the good either. Because we're so busy moving on to the next thing that we don't experience what it means to be present. So he says it's a mental habit that can be broken by allowing this moment just to be as it is. And he says when we say no to this moment, we are strengthening the ego. And when we say yes to this moment, then we're weakening it. So I just thought, just thinking of something that's happened recently where you recognize that you were not able to really say yes in that moment. Let's just go back and take a minute and contemplate it. And if you can, what you want to do is to sense the difference between saying no and saying yes. And it can be something wonderful. How many times do we miss a wonderful opportunity because we're against that too, for all kinds of reasons? I have a friend who put on a lot of weight and she loves to dance. And so she went to a Christmas party and everybody was dancing. But she chose to just be sad because she was overweight and felt like she couldn't dance. And so even when wonderful opportunities present themselves, we find ways of sabotaging that. So just for a couple of minutes, just closing your eyes and recalling a time recently where you were preoccupied and not being in the moment. And if you can, feel what it felt like to resist that moment, strengthening your ego. It's a wonderful place to find where your ego lives. Can you feel that resistance to the moment? And now, as best you can, accept that moment. Surrender to it. Weaken the ego. Move closer to the soul and see how that feels. Try. I hope you just get a chance to feel the difference. You know, it's hard sometimes. We live so much from the ego and yet we don't recognize it. And that's a wonderful way to recognize how it feels when the ego is in charge and how it feels when the soul is in charge, and the difference, so that we're more able to let go when things are hard. So Eckhart Tolle goes on to talk about how, people are very busy, but what is the quality of our doing? What are we bringing to life as we're going through it, busy doing things? Whether you're driving, talking, walking, on your computer, running in errands, how total are you in your doing? Is your doing surrendered or not surrendered? Another way of putting that from a different view is your doing of service or not of service? And he says, success, this is where success comes from. How surrendered is your doing for leading a successful, joyful, attuned life? It's not about how much effort you put in, because effort can be agitated. It doesn't have that quality of stillness. Yogis talk about effortless effort. So it's the ego that starts the job. But if you're willing to let it, it's the soul that takes over. So, how is your doing? We don't want stress and strain. And he says, just the slightest element of not wanting to be doing it is a denial of life. I think that's a very strong statement, that if there's in your doing an element of not wanting to do it, and given that we know as human beings, we don't like to do things we're not good at. So how are we letting our soul in when we're struggling? We want to put our best foot forward and look like we're doing well. But that's such a limited view. So the slightest element of not wanting to be doing whatever it is you're doing, as in denial of life, and really that true success, that true fulfillment doesn't happen. It doesn't happen when we're not free in our doing, surrendered and letting go of the mind's commentary on what's happening. So we want to learn to do one thing at a time, be total in anything that we're doing, be able to give it our complete attention. He says acceptance of what is takes us to a deeper level, where it's the inner state and sense of self that's no longer dependent on the mind's judgment of good and bad. We think of ourselves at a certain level. We measure ourselves always a lot of the time against other people. But sometimes it's the simplest task that you can do with the greatest consciousness and kindness that brings you more into the now. It can also be the things that you're really good at, that allows you to drop the ego and trust that doing, that surrendered doing. It's not the mind's idea of what's good and what's bad. It's the soul's. And for the soul, it's that surrendering into the stillness that's so much more important than how good you are in the outside world at the job at hand. So, and he says, surrender is easier when you realize that nothing in the world is going to fulfill us. So we're able to stop demanding that this situation we're in that we don't like, stop trying to make this situation or person or place or event or, trying to make that be what satisfies you and makes you happy. It doesn't. And that's really, really hard for us to let go of. Even after years of doing yoga, we still have that sense that somehow we'll get our act together, we'll get it all neatly together, and then we'll have this wonderful life. But everybody, all the great souls say, no, your wonderful life is here and now. The kingdom of God is at hand. It's not in this mythical future that never shows up. We're waiting for this better moment to be present in. When the moment's nicer, I'll be present in it. I don't want to be present in this moment because it seems a bit hard. And yet, it's like the Wizard of Oz. All of the problems melt away if you have the courage to be in the moment. The externals may not change, but your experience and your view of what's happening will change completely. And he says, when you completely accept this moment the compulsion that we have to think lessens and is replaced by conscious stillness, an alertness, but a stillness. We're fully conscious, aware of the moment, but we've stopped our sort of infernal labeling of good, bad, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be here, this is not what I want, this is not my choice, I don't like this. We can let that go. And that opens us up to this incredible, the support of the universe to help us. And he says, am I saying, enjoy this moment, be happy? And he said, no, I'm not. He says, what I'm saying is, allow the moment to be. That's enough. If you're not happy, allow your not happiness to be. If you're angry, allow your anger or your fear to just be. Allow the truth of this moment. It's incredibly powerful. What a way to live. To accept and to surrender to each moment. And he says, surrendering to the moment is very different to surrendering to the mind story of what's happening in the moment. And he gave an example. It's like, somebody who becomes disabled. So they have been, they have been fit and well. Maybe they have an accident and they find that they're no longer easily able to walk. They may be in a wheelchair. So the truth of it is they're in a condition of not being able to walk. That is the reality of it. But very often the mental content of what's going on is, this is what my life has become. I've ended up in a wheelchair. I can't walk. It's unfair. What did I do to deserve this? I don't want this. So there's a difference between living in the story about what's happening and the reality of it. The reality is not an unkindness. The reality is just the truth. In that moment, it's just the truth. So, and I think this is something for us all to really look at. He says, surrender comes when you no longer ask the question, why me? How often do we ask those questions? Things like, what we're saying, I don't want to be here, and why me? The entire, your entire life has brought you to this moment. So you know exactly why me. Because everything that's happened to you in your life has brought you to this spot. It's our mental decisions about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing that causes such grief. You can see, if you look at two different people who have the same problem and how differently they live their lives. I happen to know I have a couple of family members and friends who have Parkinson's. And one of them is embracing life, is accepting this is the reality of this moment. And the other's railing against it. And it is really amazing to watch how it affects the quality of their lives. The truth of it is the same, but their ability to accept and surrender to it are completely different. So how do we do that? Each one of us, how are we going to do this? Well, one of the ways is to stop asking, why me? Stop resisting, stop being, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this. So I just thought we'll end with this. Eckhart Tolle says that within most unpleasant, painful situations is concealed a deeper good. It's a brave, brave soul who dares to look for that. Within most unpleasant, painful situations is concealed a deeper good. In disaster is the seed of grace. In the face of loss, illness, imprisonment, terrible conditions, men and women find within that peace that passeth all understanding. Sometimes surrender can be giving up trying to understand. Don't worry about understanding it. It's okay not to know. You can still accept. And he says, acceptance of the unacceptable is the greatest source of grace in this world. So let's just finish just for 2 minutes, just closing our eyes. And really all you want to do is sense this as a reality, as a profound truth. And you think of the resistance we have to the world. Can we accept our circumstances and ourselves with all of our problems? Acceptance of the unacceptable is the greatest source of grace in this world. Joy. It's been one of the greatest blessings of my life to have had the privilege of spending time with people who know how to live in the now, and that they bring that sacredness to every moment. Namaste.